Now, the other main news story overnight to the Red Sea now, where British and American Navy vessels repelled the most significant Houthi attack yet. It comprised of 18 drones and 3 missiles.
Now, following that flare-up, the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, warned action would be taken if the attacks don't stop, saying, watch this space.
Delighted to say, to tell us more in the studio, Defence Editor for The Sun, Jerome Starkey. Morning, Jerome. Thank you for coming by. We have had both Tobias Ellwood on and we've had Rear Admiral Chris Parry, both saying whenever we talk about what's going on in the world, certain people, and you will know this as a defence editor, will say, oh, you're warmongering. With what's happening in Ukraine, with what's happening in the Middle East, with what happened in the Red Sea yesterday, and Iran's fingerprints are over it all, it feels like a seminal moment. It feels like a moment where the world needs to take note. The guys were saying this is like 1939, this is like the Cold War all over again.
It's certainly an incredibly fraught moment in geopolitics. You're absolutely right to say that Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said, watch this space. He said the military might was in place, the warships, the Royal Navy warships, the American warships are there. Of course, the United Kingdom also has its base in Cyprus where it can launch fighter jets from if it needed to. But there is also a very complicated calculation going on. On the one hand, the international community, led by the United States and indeed backed by the United Kingdom, have issued this very clear warning to the Houthis: stop, or you will face consequences. They haven't said what those consequences will be, but the risk is if, as the Houthis continue to ignore those warnings, the collective West is seen to do nothing, then of course those warnings have less weight in future.
Is that where we are? Because Grant Shapps, what he said yesterday sounded quite strong, but it's the same as what he said 2 weeks ago. And at what point, he seems to have taken the decision, the US too, that at this point, acting further would be ratcheting things up and we don't want to be responsible for what happens there. How long can they just hold and say words for now will be enough, do you think? What's their strategy?
Well, my understanding is that they have a target list. They've had a target list for some time. But as you rightly say, it's a calculation between what they can achieve with military strikes, and that would probably be attempting to degrade the Houthi rebels' capability. That might be hitting some of the fast boats or the ports they've been using. It might be hitting an individual missile launcher where they've been firing these cruise and ballistic missiles. It might be trying to hit a warehouse where they might be storing some of these drones. We understand Iranian-made drones, which they are using. There are more serious opportunities. I mean, there are continuing reports that there's an Iranian merchant vessel which is being used in... Grant Shapps didn't name the vessel, but he did say that he believed Iran was the eyes and ears of the Houthis in the Red Sea.
I think it's the elephant in the room. I think it's absolutely obvious that Iran's there. The interesting thing for me is, as well, and Tobias sort of nailed it when he said, ratcheting up. What do we do? Do we sit and do nothing and allow this to happen? And you know, we can talk about trade in the Red Sea and that 40-mile extra journey or whatever, 40-day journey. I'm talking about the world order, in effect. Or do we show the Houthis that what they're doing is wrong? Do we risk alienating, if you like, Iran? I notice it's the US and the UK and Europe's nowhere to be seen, Jerome, as usual.
Well, Jeremy, I think there's a lot to be said for, speak quietly and carry a big stick. And, at the moment it would seem that the international community, the United States Navy, the Royal Navy, have their big sticks in place in the southern Red Sea. But words and actions matter. And on the one hand, we've had Secretary of State Blinken visiting Israel and visiting Arab countries also in the region with a message of de-escalation, trying very hard to try and ratchet that conflict down. And of course, it would send a confusing message and it would leave the West open to the accusation of hypocrisy. And that has already happened significantly. Of course, the global South in many ways has looked at the West's response to Ukraine and the condemnation of Russia and then compared that to the West's sort of abiding support for Israel and seen a discrepancy. And that has in some countries undermined respect for the West and the West messages. So they're treading a very delicate line.
Has that given the Houthis more scope to feel more emboldened to act?
It certainly feels like the Houthis feel that they can get away with ignoring these warnings. I mean, it's worth pointing out this morning, there has reports of a new ship being boarded in the Gulf of Aden, much closer to Iran. I'm not sure who's behind that at the moment, but just early reports of a merchant vessel being boarded. That could be the Houthi rebels. We've seen them boarding merchant ships off the coast of Yemen already. It could be other actors. It could be Iran. Indeed, it could be other sovereign nations around the Gulf.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Shapps yesterday, as Rosie quite rightly said, saying, you know, watch this space. Cynics will say it's election year, and he said the same a few weeks ago. Ben Wallace, I think, I surmise this, I could be wrong, you'd know more as the defence editor of The Sun, but was pretty hacked off about how investment in our armed forces and defence in general had suffered over many, many years. Yesterday, Grant Shapps, he's sort of questioning the Marines, the Royal Marines. Where do you see yourself? What is the importance of you? I think this government, however long it's got left, will do what it should do and actually spend some money on defence? Or do you think that they will continue along the same path? Because certainly with what potentially can happen in the world, we're certainly not where we needed to be or we ever were before, are we?
It's certainly my understanding from working very closely with defence officials over the last few years that the feeling has been that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, doesn't necessarily get defence, he's not strong on defence, and was reluctant to give the Ministry of Defence and the Armed Forces the money that they wanted. Of course, you know, this is particularly when he was Treasurer and also continues when he's been Prime Minister. Grant Shapps said yesterday that he wants defence spending to increase to 2.5%. And he reminded journalists that he's been on the record as saying he thinks it should be 3%. We're living in a more dangerous world. About this time last year, his predecessor, Ben Wallace, was asking the Treasury for £11 billion. And that's a huge amount of money on top of what the Ministry of Defence already gets. But that was to try and keep pace with the inflation costs, the rising costs of just meeting the current defence programmes. In the end, he got £5 billion. Now, £3 billion of that, or more than half of it, went on renewing our nuclear deterrent. I mean, that is an incredibly expensive and largely unseen part of the Ministry of Defence's cost. Another £2 billion went on replacing a lot of the ammunition and the kit that we'd already gifted to Ukraine. So the three main services, the Army, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, remain tight. But defence chiefs have insisted and have repeatedly said over the last few months that they're not asking for more money. They believe it's their responsibility to do what they can with the money that they've already got.
Yeah. Jerome, thank you so much.
Thank you, pal. Really good of you to stop by. Thank you so much indeed. Jerome Starkey.